it's part of, I believe there's some components of that that's in the KPMG audits, or part of the financial audits is through our carbon fund is looked at as well, but not for the particular carbon inventory, I believe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Plant and then Councillor Haynes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Trinell, for your presentation tonight. I have several questions in regarding to the core budget on page 27. I just would like to ask, the budget for information technology for 2015 was allocated at $3.3 million and came in at $3.0 million or $3.1 million. And that's a cost saving of nearly $260,000. Council was under the impression through various interactions this year that information technology was being underfunded. And so I'm curious how we have saved so much money in that. Nothing wrong with saving money, but I would just like to know where that is, because it relates to the next question, because I see that we're going up to increase, even though it's only 1.1%, an increase from what we have budgeted the previous year.
Through the Mayor to Councillor Plant, through the year of 2015 we had a significant number of staff vacancies, and that is why we have savings. The increase from 2015 to 2016 reflects the wage and benefit changes that was happening. The other comment that you made is that you heard that IT has been underfunded. That's on the capital side of the equation.
Okay, the subsequent question then, as we weigh the future changes, I noticed under corporate services 12.53% increase and 13.62%, and I'm not sure if I actually see where that's aligned to specific initiatives. If you can perhaps take me through that, because 13 and 12% increases are significantly above the general number that we're looking at.
Through the Mayor to Councillor Plant, those two reflect the full year wages for two positions that were part year wages in 2015, as well as some additional costs in corporate services related to the support of the new communications division, and some other minor changes within the human resources area related to wages and benefits.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Haynes, you had your hand up.
I'm not going to ask any questions, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for Director of Corporate Services on this section? I had a quick one. I was looking for a bit more of an update on the phone system. At the last budget we did last year, it was introduced kind of on its own as a $1 million item. And on page 26, it says telephone systems review and assessment. Could you give us an idea of where we are in the RFP stage for that replacement?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we have done the assessment and we are starting to assemble the RFP. The assessment of the current phone systems proved to be more challenging than we had anticipated because of the difficulties we had in assessing all of the components of the system that we currently have. We anticipate that the RFP will go out in the spring.
All right, thank you for that. Any more questions from council? Okay, let's move on to the next section.
The next section, Finance Department and Fiscal Services, I'll do those back to back as they're related. Finance Department starts on page 28. The Finance Department is comprised of the Financial Services Division and the Revenue Collection Division, and we cover the range of services from payroll, purchasing, accounts payable, and revenue collection through the tax division. In 2015, our main accomplishments were continuing to make improvements to our purchasing processes. We've seen some significant move forward in the robustness of our purchasing and procurement processes. And we were also able to complete the implementation of the records management strategy for finance, and we're able to get rid of and appropriately destroy a significant number of documents that were being held in off-site storage. So we were able to get ourselves into a good place. As has been discussed several times before, our main significant project for 2016 is the upgrading process for the JD Edwards financial software, which is currently well underway. When we look at our budget numbers, the significant changes from our core budget for 2015 to 2016, although the increase looks significant, essentially we have transferred a position from the engineering, the funding for a position from engineering temporarily to finance to support the JDO Group's implementation. So there's an offset there, although there seems to be a significant increase. Also incorporated into the finance department's budget is the contingency and administration recoveries. So that's the area that shows the most significant increase for finance. But those are in areas of the contingencies that we have set aside for WCB cost increases, and also the approximately $100,000 that is incorporated into the budget guideline for the inventory increases. Again, this year it's invasive species strategy, some licensing costs, and parks maintenance, sort of the standard suite of inventory items. That's a brief summary of the finance department. There's not a lot changing, but happy to answer any questions.
Councillor Blunt, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Director Tinney. I'm wondering if you could just help me understand again, on page 29, referring to the core budget component, the budget amount was 2.75, we came in at 1.19, and I'm wondering how that 800, and I know you referred to the contingency and administration, I'm just not understanding where that's coming from. Please, if you then, because then to go from, as you said, 2.7 to 3.2, that is 500,000. I think is a pretty big sum, especially if you say that there is one staff member in that accounting. It still would leave, even if that staff member was 100, let's say 200,000, $250,000 increase. So I'm just wondering if you could take me through those several questions.
Absolutely, through the mayor. The significant change, you see that, I believe you're referring to the 500,000 as the total of the 466 at the bottom of the chart.
Yeah, that was my last question.
So the 287, 300 under contingency, the increase there, that would be for primarily for the WCB costs.
Okay.
And then the budget to actual from the previous year, we budget a significant, I believe it's $900,000 for contingency for emergencies in the year within that budget. So if we don't have a surplus of about $900,000 in that budget, that means that we've had to spend. So we would expect to see that kind of a surplus from that budget line.
Again.
Yeah.
Okay. So we should expect to see that sort of next year, same amount.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
And just an overall comment, the actuals for 2016, for 2015 in this document, we are just starting on the year-end process. So these are preliminary year-end numbers. There is a lot of work yet to be done on the financial statements for 2015, so these numbers will be updated. So that's just a notice that these numbers will change. These are preliminary year-end numbers for 2015.
Could they go up and down, or do they only go up?
They can go up and down.
Thank you.
Moving on to, sorry.
Any more questions on this section? Sorry. Any more questions from councillors on this section? All right, Sina, go ahead, I'll move on.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Fiscal services on page 30. We see the increase of $250,000 that was referenced in the upfront presentation as the increase to debt servicing to stay within the policy debt servicing levels. This is to support capital acquisitions. Any questions on debt servicing?
Councillor Branoff, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Perhaps, Ms. Tinney, you could once again explain our policy, guidelines around maximum borrowing.
Certainly. Through the mayor, the province sets an overall limit for all municipalities within British Columbia for the level of debt servicing that they may include in their financial plans. And that is set at 25% of what's called the revenue calculation. Saanich further limits that to 7% for property tax revenue only. So it's a significant reduction from what the overall legal borrowing limit is. Under our legal borrowing limit, we would be able to borrow $507 million. Under our debt servicing policy, it reduces that borrowing limit to about $88 million. So it's a significant reduction from the municipality under the community charter is legally allowed to borrow.
And could you also, have we ever borrowed up to the 7%?
Through the mayor, in any information I've seen, I've never seen anything come close to that. It's always been well within, and at the lower end of the lower limit that council sets.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Mills.
So moving into Director Tinney,
we see that the debt servicing can be for expenditure or for transfer to reserve. So in this amount, was that an expenditure at $250,000, or was that a transfer to reserve?
Through the mayor to Councillor Haynes, those are transfers to reserves currently to the IT infrastructure and facilities reserve funds. We are aware that there are significant projects coming in the future, so especially with the facilities replacement. So we are setting aside funds so that when these significant projects come forward, there is as limited an impact as possible. So that's why we see the reserves growing.
So you're each year taking a reserve amount against the debts under the 7% level of tax increase, such that you build up a reserve that can be applied to IT once we need that expenditure.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Workman?
Going back to the maximum borrowing, I guess I just asked two questions. Is it healthy to borrow to the max? And is it healthy to borrow to keep our taxes down?
Through the mayor,
Maybe wise is the word, not healthy, but I like the word healthy.
in the current situation where our borrowing rates are extremely low, so it is a prime opportunity to borrow funds to complete projects that there may be some time constraints. So in the current climate, borrowing is not a bad thing. The municipality is able to borrow without directly increasing taxes, which a lot of municipalities are not in that situation. If they go to borrow, they have to go out to a public process and ask for the additional tax funding. With the way Sandwich's budget is managed, we do our borrowing without the impact. We do the increase to say the guideline to support the capital program. And I think that's one of the key things about municipal borrowing. It supports capital acquisition. We cannot borrow to support our operating expenditures. So this is all to manage our capital infrastructure. So in those terms, we could take a look at the limits. The only way to impact taxes would be not to stay within the borrowing guideline. If we borrowed, we couldn't impact our operational tax increase, because that's not allowed under legislation.
Thank you.
Councillor German and then Councillor Plant.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your question to Ms. Tinney. In some ways, actually, too, borrowing is a way to spread the costs to taxpayers more over the life cycle of the capital equipment being purchased, is it not? So you don't ask the existing taxpayers to pay the whole thing in one given year. In a way, you are spreading it over perhaps even several generations of taxpayers, or at least one.
Through the mayor to Councillor Durbin, that's absolutely sort of the reason that a lot of municipalities will use borrowing is if it's a significant project that will benefit generations to come, then spreading that cost over is seen to be a prudent thing to do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Plant?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question to Director Tinney, because we've opened up the discussion onto borrowing. I'm just curious, on page 7, it has a listing of the bylaws we have and the maturity dates on our borrowing. And I'm just curious, the opportunity, does it exist to revisit these interest rates? Or is it whenever you buy in, that's it, and you don't have an opportunity to revisit those interest rates given the historic low rates?
Through the mayor to Councillor Plant, all of our borrowing is done through the Municipal Finance Authority, so we are tied by the way that they borrow. We can choose our borrowing terms, but generally when you first borrow, you are locked into a 10-year borrowing, and then it's adjusted in 5-year increments. We can't manage any of these terms going forward. These ones that are stated here, we don't have the ability to refinance them. We have to stay within the schedule that's set up by the Municipal Finance Authority.
Does the MFI have to do, MFA, excuse me, not MFI, MFA have the ability to refinance?
It's a very complex process. They are locked in because it's done with sinking funds, so they don't have, with the long-term debt, they wouldn't have the flexibility to collapse a bond release and then go out and refinance. So in essence, you're locked in for these periods of time. If they are able to invest the sinking fund, we end up getting money back. So sometimes the results end up being better than you see here for a number of years as interest rates were dropping. and we were able to invest at higher rates, we were seeing significant debt reserve funds coming back to us at the end of debt. So there's a lot of layers.
Thank you. Yes, Claire.
Councillor Haynes, you have a question?
Looks like it's not much. On page 7, I see, in follow-up to Councillor Plant's question about the maturity date, and I see the bylaw number. Just in terms of interest and understanding, would it be possible to include the date when the loan was executed? Because I see some of the maturity dates are 2021, it's 4.3%, 4.43%, etc. And what is the typical borrowing time? 5, 10, 20, 30 years?
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Haynes, Sandwich has historically borrowed at 15-year terms, so that would sort of help you. We're planning on adding a couple more columns to this chart to give a sense. This is the debt outstanding at the end of the year. We feel it would be helpful for council to be able to see what the annual debt servicing payment is, so that when this debt starts to come off, you know what monies are going to be released for debt servicing. So we'll be adding that in for the next iteration of this budget document, because we feel that will be helpful. No, I lost your original question. Yeah, the start date? Yeah, so most of these are going to be 15 years. We're starting to do different terms of debt based on the type of asset. So if we were borrowing for machinery and equipment, we may look to 5 years. And if we're going to be borrowing for buildings in the future, we would look to longer, to 20 to 30 years, based on the life of the asset. And that's set out in our the debt policy that was adopted by council in the last couple of years, sort of aligning the life of the asset to the borrowing term.
Thank you very much.
Any more questions on this section from council members? All right, seeing none, let's move on to the next one.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, Mayor and councillors. I'm pleased to present an overview of the submission for legislative services that begins on page 31 of your financial plan document. Legislative services comprises 4 divisions: lands, legal, legislative, and risk management, and 2 sections: archives and strategic planning. Together, we provide a diverse variety of administrative and legal services that manage and protect municipal assets and coordinate corporate strategic planning. I'm proud of the ongoing work of our team and want to highlight a couple of accomplishments from 2015. Working with David Lucadellis as legal counsel and BC's former Information and Privacy Commissioner, a comprehensive review of corporate privacy management and compliance was undertaken. Completion of this project has taken us through 2016. In January, Council revised its Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy bylaw to reflect existing provincial legislation. A privacy officer has been appointed, and a draft privacy management plan is being completed as we move to implement a more comprehensive program. Another initiative that we undertook, and this one actually goes back a year now, but was a fairly extensive project, were the citizen and business surveys. These have been conducted following each election with the idea that it provides the incoming council with information to help guide financial and strategic decision-making over the term of office. Council will have seen some of that tonight in the presentation by Ms. Tinney. Staff retained Forum Research in January 2015 to undertake these surveys, and that's the first time that we've actually gone to an external consultant to do that. The results of these were presented to council, and they are available, of course, in full on the website. Statistically valid surveys provide council staff and the community with important information, including levels of satisfaction and importance of services provided by the municipality. As part of the work done by Forum Research, they provided some value-added services for us, and they benchmarked some of the key performance indicators against comparable local governments within BC, and Sandwich came out very well in those council review from last year. Although the bulk of our department's work is not project-oriented, in 2016 we will be moving forward with some project-type initiatives, and I just wanted to touch on a couple of those. Clearly, we'll continue to work with our colleagues on the webcasting project. That's something that will be coming back to council. And following approval and implementation of that phase 1, we will look at phase 2, which is the acquisition of an electronic agenda management system. So those are intended to go hand in hand as we move forward. And then as part of our ongoing corporate records management program, we plan to coordinate a review of the original strategy elements to determine which remain valid. So some years ago, we put together a 5-year strategy, which was intended to get us to a place where we had an overarching corporate records management system that was electronic. There have been lots of budget cutbacks and belt tightening, and so we aren't in the place where we thought we might be. And so we've certainly managed to get our paper records up to snuff. We've got formal corporate records there, and we do have electronic record keeping via various programs, but we need something that's more overarching. So we are starting to look at what that original strategy was, what other elements are still valid there, and then start to prepare to take us forward. It's going to be several years before we get there, and it's certainly going to take a significant amount of resources, both in technology and staff. But it is a place that we need to get if we want to have a really holistic program that looks at records management, access to information, and protection of privacy, all as one sort of continuum, which is vital. In terms of resource challenges, together with my colleagues, we always continue to look for additional resources within our overall department budgets. How can we move monies around? How can we make services more efficient? And so we continue to do that, but the biggest challenge for us is clearly in the general legal services budget. We have asked for an injection there. That will be discussed in more detail as we get to the next budget meeting when resource requests are looked at. So I won't go into any more detail there. And just concluding my presentation, happy to answer any questions, Mr. Mayor.
Great, thank you for that. Any questions from members of council? Councillor Plant.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question to our Director of Legislative Services, and thank you first off for your report. I'm just curious if you care to comment on the budget for legal services. I'm noticing that this year it looks like, and I acknowledge the comments by Director Tinney that the numbers are not finalized for 2015. If you would care to comment on what seems to be a fairly significant increase, and if therefore the budget for 2016 in reflection of the actuals of 2015 will be adequate.
Thank you, Councillor Plant. Through Mr. Mayor, we have projected an expenditure of $350,000 for general legal services on a budget of $105,000. We've actually hit the $345,000 mark, and so we'll see if that goes up or down. I would imagine it'll go down at this point, but we think all of the invoices are in. And so what we've asked for is an additional, so certainly the $105,000 budget would not be adequate for 2016. We have seen the legal expenses start to increase again to really our pre-2010 levels when we changed our model. So pre-2010 we had in-house legal counsel, and we also used some contract legal services. Halfway through 2010 we went to a model that saw no in-house legal counsel, and we contracted all of those services. At the same time there was a major budget reduction. So the budget was close to $220,000 when we had the in-house plus contract, and that was taken down to just about $110,000. And the first year, gosh, we didn't even spend it all. We managed really well, but legal expenses are a very interesting creature because they can fluctuate dramatically from one year to the next, just depending on a court case or a particular set of initiatives that have come forward. And so what we're really seeing is each year the costs have been rising. We've been able to find ways to absorb them in our overall budget, but clearly we won't be able to do that going forward. So we're looking at asking council for an additional $100,000. Ms. Tinney and I have talked about it. It may turn out to be transitional, but clearly we wouldn't want to ask council for more than we think we would need, and we'll see where it goes. There are 3 areas that I would say are the majority of the reason why we see these increases rising. And a lot of it has to do with the legislation and changes in legislation. So access and privacy is a huge area that requires a fair bit of legal advice and consultation. Human resources is an area we've seen lots of legislative changes there, and that just is an area that continues to increase. And I'd say that one of the other big ones is really around the purchasing area. That is the legislative requirements, the technical requirements. We are now in a global purchasing situation. So, 20 years ago, pretty simple. Nowadays, we're into contracts and requirements that we have to meet that meet trade agreements, that are North American and beyond. And so we tend to need a fair bit of legal advice in that vein as well.
If I may continue, I'm a little confused because I'm looking at page 33 and I'm looking at numbers in the 419,000, 446,000, 15-16 budget, but you mentioned a 350 and a 100. So I was looking at, my comments and questions were based on the numbers that are in this document, page 33, not the other one. So maybe if you could clarify that for me.
Thank you, Councillor Plant, through Mr. Mayor. So the actual budget that you see in legal services of $580,400 includes the $345,000 that I was just alluding to in general legal services. Our actual budgeted amount was just shy of $420,000. What I was able to do was actually move some money around within the budget to bring an additional infusion of cash into general legal services, about $20,000, and the remainder of what you see there in between the 2 years' budgets has to do with already decided increases, staff wage increases, and projected.
Perhaps I misunderstood then. So the 345,000 of that 580 is for lawyer fees, is that correct? Or
Yes, Mr. Mayor, of the $580,400 actually spent for legal services, $345,000 is for general legal services.
so the trend is one that perhaps council should turn itself to about the potential of needing to hire a lawyer again. I know you've indicated that we're trying to not do that, and in the first few years we did save funds, but clearly I think you indicated it was $220,000 for a legal staff member, and 345 was spent this year as a year that will be over significantly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, if we looked at an in-house model, this year it would be about $275,000 as a minimum amount. And so those are some issues that certainly we're looking at as a senior management group, and we'll continue to look at whether in-house model may be something that we would want to recommend council go back to.
But we're not there
we're not there yet.
And then last question, promise everyone, is the difference between the 580,400 and the 345,000, is that support staff and legal clerical staff?
Those are primarily staff costs.
Thank you very much for all those answers.
Councillor Workman.
Thank you very much. I'll be pleased when the podium is moved. I think we have staff at the table like over here. Coming back to insurance and claims, I assume we're self-insured. What does insurance and claims mean?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We are. There was a decision made many years ago at a time when liability insurance for local governments was actually hard to come by, if you could afford it at all or even find a market for it. The council of the day made a decision to self-insure, so the first $2 million of liability sits in a reserve fund, and that's set aside for claims. And then we do go out to the market to insure beyond that. I've got our risk manager here, Scott Broughton, with me. He can certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but we're up another 20 million, and I think perhaps 10 beyond that.
We carry 20 in excess of the 2 million self-insured.
So we do carry the 20 in excess of the 2 million. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much.
Any more questions from council members for our Director of Legislative Services? All right, seeing none, thank you for that. And we'll move on to the next section.
The planning department budget starts on page 45 of the agenda package. The planning department represents 5 divisions: community planning, current planning, environmental services, sustainability and climate change, and finally building inspections and bylaw enforcement. In terms of overall activity in the planning department during the last year, there has been a steady level of applications, which includes major ongoing projects such as Up 10, which would include the parking structure, Whole Foods, and the new commercial retail units. and a range of mid-size and smaller commercial, multiple family and institutional developments across the district. Construction values and building permit revenue looked at over the last 5 years has remained relatively constant. Multiple family residential permits show a slight decrease over 2014 where we had 4 permits, and this year in 2015 we had 6. And we anticipate a modest increase in multiple family residential permits in 2016. Commercial building permits have seen a slight decrease over the last year, 155 in 2014 and 137 in 2015. Subdivision activity has remained fairly constant over the last couple of years, and no significant change is anticipated in 2016. In 2015, there were 10 applications received representing 30 potential new lots. Overall, there are currently 57 subdivision active applications representing 159 new lots. And not surprisingly, the demand for long-range and community planning, including things such as climate change and sustainability initiatives, continue to remain strong, as do the number of bylaw enforcement calls. They again continue to rise. In terms of some key accomplishments in 2015, they're outlined on page 46 and 47 of your agenda package, so I won't go into too much detail, but you will note that the Capital Region's first electric vehicle fast charging station was installed at Uptown, and we're pleased to note that is the most used charging station in British Columbia. So that's certainly a good thing for the people that have electric vehicles in a CRD and Saanich. We also want to bring to your attention the pilot bike kitchen workshops that were part of the Bike to Work Week, and allow people that are moving throughout the community using cyclists